For many weeks, a young man named Arun had been walking through the quiet mountain trails, far from cities, towns, and noise. He had started this long hike to find peace. Life in the city had become heavy for him. Every day felt the same, and his mind was always tired. So one morning, he packed a small bag with food, water, and a tent and decided to explore the mountains alone. He wanted to listen to the sound of nature, the singing of birds, and the whisper of wind between the trees. At first, the hike was exciting. Every sunrise felt like a promise, and every path looked new and beautiful. Arun would stop to watch rivers flowing under small bridges and listen to the gentle sound of water hitting the rocks. He met no one on the trail, and that silence gave him time to think about his life. Sometimes he felt lonely, but mostly, he felt free. After a few days, his shoes were covered in dust, his clothes smelled of smoke from small campfires, and his hair was messy from wind and rain. Still, he felt happy. He often wrote in a small notebook he carried in his pocket. He wrote about the trees, the sky, and the stars. At night, when the air turned cold, he would sit beside his tent, watching the flames dance and thinking about how peaceful the world could be when one was far away from everything. But after several weeks of hiking, Arun started to feel tired. His food was almost gone and his body had become weak. The trail had grown harder, steeper, and quieter. For 2 whole days, he hadn't seen any signs of people. No houses, no animals, not even smoke in the distance. The loneliness started to feel heavier. The silence that once felt peaceful now felt strange and endless. One afternoon, dark clouds began to cover the sky. The wind grew cold and the trees started to sway. Arun knew it was going to rain soon. He looked around for shelter but saw nothing but forest and hills. The sun disappeared behind the clouds, and soon, heavy drops began to fall. He quickly covered his bag and started walking faster, hoping to find somewhere dry before night came. As the rain fell harder, he saw a faint shape through the mist. It looked like a small structure standing alone on the edge of the forest. At first he thought it might be another group of rocks or an old shed. But as he walked closer, he saw that it was an old barn. Its roof was rusty and the wood on the walls looked dark and worn. The doors were slightly open and grass had grown tall around it. It looked completely abandoned, but to Arun it was the only safe place he could find. He hurried toward it, stepping through mud and wet leaves. When he reached the barn, he pushed the large wooden door slowly. It creaked loudly, echoing in the silence. Inside it was dark and dusty. The air smelled of old hay and damp wood. Broken tools lay in one corner, and a few birds flew out from the roof as he entered. It was clear that no one had been here for many years. Arun stepped inside carefully. He looked around, noticing the faded paint and the small cracks in the walls. There was a broken ladder leading to the upper floor, and old boxes scattered near the back. He felt both curious and cautious. He set down his bag and took out his small flashlight to look around better. The light beam cut through the dust in the air, showing him spider webs, old ropes, and piles of hay. He decided to stay there for the night. It was better than sleeping outside in the rain. He cleared a small space near one of the walls and placed his sleeping mat there. The roof still had a few holes, but it was enough to protect him from most of the rain. As he sat quietly, listening to the sound of raindrops hitting the roof, he felt a strange calmness. While exploring the barn more closely, Arun noticed something odd. Near the back wall, under a pile of hay, something was shining faintly. It caught the light from his flashlight for a second. Curious, he moved the hay away and saw an old metal box. It was small, rusted, and locked with a weak latch. It didn't look valuable, but it felt mysterious. He hesitated before opening it. His mind was full of questions. Who had left it there? How long had it been sitting under that hay? Finally, he decided to open it. The latch broke easily. Inside, wrapped in a piece of old cloth, were a few photographs and a small leather notebook. The photos were black and white, showing a family standing in front of what looked like the same barn many years ago. A man, a woman, and 2 children smiled at the camera. Arun felt a soft sadness when he saw those faces. The family looked happy, but their clothes in the background suggested it had been a long time ago. He opened the notebook carefully. The pages were yellow and smelled old. The handwriting was neat and gentle, written with care. The first few pages described life on a small farm. It seemed the man in the photos had once lived here with his family. They had raised animals, grown crops, and lived a simple life surrounded by nature. But as Arun turned more pages, the writing changed. It became shorter and sadder. The writer spoke about the family leaving the barn, about losing their crops to heavy rain, and about their struggle to survive. The last entry said, "I hope one day someone finds this place and remembers our life here." Aaron read that line again and again. It touched him deeply. He felt connected to that family even though he had never met them. The thought that this barn had once been filled with laughter and life made the place feel less empty. He sat there for a long time, thinking about how time can change everything. What was once full of warmth could become cold and forgotten. The rain continued outside and the sound grew softer as the night deepened. Arun put the notebook and photos back into the box and placed it carefully beside him. He lay down on his mat and looked up at the roof through the gaps in the wood. The stars were hidden by clouds, but he could still imagine them shining above. Before falling asleep, he whispered to himself that maybe finding this barn was not an accident. Maybe it was meant to remind him of something, to value life, memories, and the quiet beauty of simple things. As the rain slowed and the forest became still again, Arun closed his eyes, not knowing that what he would discover in the morning would change his journey in a way he never expected. When Arun woke up the next morning, the sound of rain had stopped. The air inside the barn was cold and smelled of wet earth and old wood. A few rays of sunlight entered through the cracks in the walls, filling the place with a soft golden light. He slowly sat up and stretched his arms. His body ached from the long days of hiking and sleeping on hard ground, but he felt strangely peaceful. He looked around. The metal box still sat near him, safe where he had left it. The photos and the notebook inside had given him comfort the night before. He felt as if he had met the people who once lived here. Their story was now a part of his journey. Arun stood up and stepped outside. The forest looked fresh after the rain. Drops of water shone on the leaves, and the smell of wet grass filled the air. The clouds were slowly moving away, revealing a clear blue sky. He took a deep breath and felt thankful that he had found this place. He looked at the barn from the outside. It stood quietly among tall trees, its wooden walls covered in moss and vines. Birds were singing on the roof, and a small rabbit hopped through the grass nearby. Arun smiled. For the first time in weeks, he felt he was not alone. He returned inside and decided to look around more carefully. There were many corners he had not checked last night because of the darkness. He wanted to know more about the barn and the family who had lived there. In one corner, he found an old table covered with dust. There were broken jars and some tools lying on it. On the floor below, he saw small wooden boxes that looked like they once held seeds. He imagined the farmer filling those boxes with seeds before planting them in the nearby fields. He could almost hear the laughter of children helping their parents. The image made his heart warm. Then Arun noticed the ladder that led to the upper floor. It looked weak but still strong enough to hold his weight. Carefully, he climbed up. The wooden steps creaked under his feet and dust rose in the air as he moved. When he reached the top, he found a small loft filled with hay and a few old blankets. It looked like a place where someone might have once rested or watched over the animals below. As he walked slowly across the loft, he noticed something shining near the far corner. It was a small metal object half buried under the hay. He knelt down and pulled it out. It was a small key, old and rusty. He held it in his hand and looked around, wondering what it might open. Aaron thought about the metal box he had found last night. Maybe the key belonged to something else that was hidden here. He climbed down carefully, holding the key tightly. He began searching around the lower floor again, looking for any sign of a lock or another box. Behind one of the wooden beams, he saw something unusual. A part of the wall looked slightly different, as if it had been repaired many years ago. The wood was newer compared to the rest. He touched it and noticed that it moved a little when he pressed it. Curious, he pushed harder, and the small wooden panel shifted to the side, revealing a hidden space behind it. Inside that space was a small wooden chest covered with dust and cobwebs. Aaron's heart started to beat faster. He wiped the dust away and saw a small keyhole in the front. Without waiting, he used the old key he had found upstairs. It fit perfectly. He turned it slowly until it clicked open. Inside the chest were several objects wrapped in old cloth. Aaron took them out one by one. The first was a tiny wooden toy shaped like a horse. It looked handmade, perhaps by the father for his children. The second was a piece of folded paper that had turned yellow with age. He unfolded it carefully. It was a letter. The handwriting was the same as the one in the notebook he had read the night before. The letter was short but filled with emotion. It said that the family had to leave their home because of difficult times. They had no choice but to move away and start again somewhere else. The writer said he hoped that one day someone would find the barn and take care of it again, because every piece of wood and every nail carried memories of their life. Aaron read the letter slowly. He could almost hear the voice of the person who wrote it. He looked at the toy horse and imagined a small child holding it with joy. The chest was not filled with treasure, but it held something far more valuable: memories of love, hard work, and family. He placed the things back inside carefully, just as they were, and closed the lid. Then he sat down on the floor and thought deeply. For many weeks he had been walking, looking for peace. He had thought that peace would come from silence or distance. But now, in this forgotten barn, he realized peace could also come from connection, from understanding how life continues even after people are gone. He looked around and saw the sunlight touching the wooden walls. It made the barn look almost alive again. He whispered softly that he would not forget this place. He decided to clean it up a little to bring it back to life, even if just for a short time. Aaron spent the rest of the day sweeping the floor with a broken broom he found near the door. He moved the old boxes to one side and cleared the dust from the table. He repaired the door latch using a piece of wire and even stacked the wood neatly near the entrance. By the time the sun began to set, the barn looked different. It felt warmer, lighter, and almost welcoming. When evening came, Arun sat outside, watching the sky turn orange and pink. The forest was calm, and the sound of birds returning to their nests filled the air. He felt proud and peaceful. He had not only found shelter, but also given something back to the place that had helped him. That night, he lit a small fire near the entrance and cooked the last bit of food he had. As he ate, he thought about the letter and the family. He wondered where they had gone, if they were still alive, or if their children had grown old remembering this barn. He wished he could tell them that their home was still standing and that someone cared for it. Before sleeping, Arun placed the letter and toy horse on the table beside the metal box and notebook. He wanted to keep them safe. Then he lay down, feeling tired but peaceful. The stars had returned, shining brightly through the cracks in the roof. As he slowly closed his eyes, he felt that something was guiding him to this place for a reason. He didn't know what he would find next, but he knew his journey had changed. Tomorrow he planned to explore the area around the barn. Maybe he would find more clues about the family, or maybe he would discover something about himself. The night grew quiet, and the forest whispered softly around him. The barn stood strong once again, holding not just old memories but also new ones created by Aaron's presence. When the morning light entered through the cracks in the roof, Aaron woke up feeling fresh and full of energy. The air was cool and smelled of dew. Birds were singing softly outside, and the sound filled the barn with life. Aaron stretched his arms and looked around. The barn looked different now. After cleaning it the day before, it felt warmer and more alive. Sunlight danced on the wooden floor, and the small objects he had found, the letter, the toy horse, and the notebook, rested neatly on the table. He smiled as he looked at them. Those simple things had brought him closer to the people who had once lived there. Their memories had given the place a new meaning. Aaron decided he would not leave yet. He wanted to know more about the family who had built the barn. Maybe there were still traces of them somewhere nearby. After eating a small breakfast, he packed his bag and stepped outside. The forest was bright and peaceful. The rain from the previous day had made the leaves shine. He noticed a narrow trail behind the barn, almost hidden by tall grass and bushes. It looked like no one had walked there in years. Still, something about it caught his attention. Maybe it once led to a field or a small house. Curious, Aaron decided to follow the path. The trail was rough and uneven, with roots and stones underfoot. Birds flew between the trees, and sunlight filtered through the branches above. He walked slowly, enjoying the quiet beauty of the place. After a short while, he noticed old fence posts along the way. They were broken and covered with moss, but they told him that this had once been farmland. As he continued, he came across an old water well. Its stones were cracked and weeds had grown around it. He leaned over and saw his reflection in the still water below. The well looked deep and untouched for years. It reminded him of how time can change everything, yet leave small pieces of history behind. A few steps further, he saw the remains of a wooden house. Only the lower parts of the walls and the stone fireplace were still standing. The roof had fallen long ago, and the floor was covered with dry leaves. Aaron stopped and looked at it silently. He realized this must have been the family's home. He stepped closer and looked around carefully. Inside, he saw a few broken chairs, a rusty cooking pot, and some pieces of old fabric. He could almost imagine how the family once lived there. Maybe the mother had cooked near the fireplace while the children played outside. Maybe the father had worked in the barn taking care of animals or tools. Aaron felt a wave of sadness but also admiration. Even though the place was broken, it still carried the warmth of those who had once loved it. He decided to sit on a stone near the fireplace to rest. The forest around him was silent except for the soft rustle of leaves. While sitting there, he noticed something carved into one of the stones. It looked like letters almost hidden under dirt and moss. He brushed the surface gently with his hand and read the words. It said, "For our family, for love and hope." The writing was faint, but it touched him deeply. It showed how much the family had loved this place. Aaron took out his notebook and wrote down what he had seen. He wanted to keep their memory alive in his own way. He drew a small sketch of the house and wrote a few lines about the message carved in the stone. After resting for a while, he decided to explore more around the area. Behind the old house, he found what looked like a small garden. The ground was covered with weeds, but when he looked closely, he saw wildflowers growing among them. They were small and colorful, growing freely as if guarding the place. He smiled and thought maybe these flowers were once planted by the family. He stayed there for some time, enjoying the gentle breeze. Then he started walking back toward the barn, following the same hidden path. On the way back, he noticed something unusual near the side of the trail. It was a small wooden sign half buried in the ground. He pulled it out carefully and wiped away the dirt. The words on it were almost faded, but he could still read them. It said, "Harrison Farm." So now he knew the family's name. The people in the photographs, the writer of the notebook, and the builders of the barn, they were the Harrisons. The name made the story feel more real. He carried the sign back to the barn, planning to keep it safe. When he reached the barn again, the sun was high. He placed the sign near the entrance just above the door, where it must have once hung. It looked right there, as if it had finally returned home. Then he sat down near the table, looking at all the items he had found. The metal box, the photos, the toy horse, and now the wooden sign, all pieces of a forgotten life that he had slowly uncovered. He spent the afternoon writing in his own notebook, describing everything he had seen that day. He felt that the barn and its surroundings were trying to tell him something. It was a story about hard work, family, and hope. Even though the Harrisons had left, their spirit still lived in every piece of wood and every blade of grass around the place. As evening came, the golden light filled the barn once again. Aaron cooked a small meal on his camping stove and sat near the open door, watching the sky change colors. The clouds turned pink and orange before the stars began to appear. The world felt calm and full of quiet beauty. He thought about his own life in the city. He remembered how he had always been busy, running after things that never brought him peace. But here, among old memories and silence, he had found what he had been searching for: connection and meaning. Later that night, as he prepared to sleep, he felt a strange thought come to his mind. What if someone from the Harrison family was still alive?
Maybe a grandchild or a relative?
Maybe they had forgotten about this place. He wondered if he could find them and tell them that their old barn still stood, that their memories were still alive. He looked at the photographs again and noticed something he had not seen before. On the back of one picture, there was a faint writing in pencil. It said, "Our home in Pinewood Valley." Aaron's heart jumped. That could be the name of the place where the barn stood or where the family had moved later. He knew then that his journey was not over. He had found something new to follow. The barn had given him shelter and peace, but now it was giving him purpose. He decided that the next day, he would try to find out where Pinewood Valley was. Maybe the answer would lead him to more about the Harrisons. As he lay down to sleep, the sound of crickets filled the night. The barn stood strong and quiet, the sign Harrison Farm resting proudly above the door once again. Aaron closed his eyes, feeling that his heart was lighter than before. He had started this journey to find peace in nature, but now he was on a path that might change his life in a way he never expected. When the first light of morning touched the barn, Arun woke up with a new sense of purpose. The discovery of the name Harrison Farm and the words Pinewood Valley written on the photograph had filled his mind with questions. He wanted to know more. Who were the Harrisons? Where did they go? And what was Pinewood Valley? He stood near the barn door, breathing in the fresh morning air. The forest was calm and mist floated above the grass. The world looked soft and peaceful. Arun packed his small bag, took his notebook, and decided to explore the nearby area again. He hoped to find a sign, an old road, or maybe someone who could tell him about Pinewood Valley. He followed a narrow dirt path that ran behind the barn. The ground was still wet from the earlier rain, and his shoes left clear prints. The path curved gently through the trees. The morning sun made the leaves sparkle, and birds moved quickly between the branches. After walking for about an hour, he reached an open field. It was wide and empty, with tall grass waving in the wind. In the distance, he saw what looked like the remains of an old wooden fence. He walked toward it and noticed a few scattered boards on the ground, each one covered in moss. The sight reminded him again of the Harrisons' farm. At the end of the fence stood a small wooden shed. It was almost hidden by bushes, and parts of its roof had fallen in. Arun stepped closer and pushed the door gently. It opened with a long creak. Inside, the place was dusty but still filled with small items. Rusty tools, broken jars, and some wooden crates. As he looked around, his eyes caught something unusual. In one corner, under a pile of boards, there was a small chest made of dark wood. It looked different from the other things. He brushed away the dust and tried to lift it. It was heavier than he expected. The lock on it was broken, so he opened it carefully. Inside, he found a few books, a candle holder, and a thick envelope sealed with wax. His heart began to beat faster. He picked up the envelope and looked at it closely. The writing on it was faint but still readable. It said, "To whoever finds this place." Arun opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, written in the same neat handwriting he had seen in the old notebook. It was from the father of the Harrison family. The letter began by describing how much they had loved the farm. It said they had worked hard for years, raising animals and growing crops. The land had once been full of laughter and life, but after a terrible season of storms and sickness, they had no choice but to leave. The letter continued to explain that the family had moved to a small town called Pinewood Valley, about 2 days' walk from the farm. The father had written that he hoped someone would one day find the barn and remember their story. He also mentioned that he had left something behind for whoever found the letter, a gift hidden where the sun first enters the barn. Arun read those words again and again. Where the sun first enters the barn. What could that mean? He closed the letter carefully and placed it inside his bag. He felt excited and curious. Maybe there was another secret waiting for him back at the barn. He left the shed and began walking back. The sun was higher now and the forest was full of light. He followed the same trail, his mind full of thoughts. The idea of finding something hidden made his heart race. He felt like the barn had become a friend that was slowly revealing its secrets to him. When he reached the barn, the sunlight was shining through the small cracks in the wooden walls. He stood at the door and looked inside, remembering the line from the letter. Where the sun first enters the barn. He watched carefully as the sunlight moved across the floor. The golden rays touched one corner near the front wall first. That must be the place. He walked over to that corner and looked closely. The floor there looked slightly uneven. He knelt down and brushed away some dust. Underneath, he noticed that one of the floorboards was loose. He used his pocket knife to lift it gently. Beneath it was a small hollow space. Inside, wrapped in a piece of cloth, was another small box. He lifted it out and unwrapped it carefully. The box was simple but beautifully made, with a pattern carved into the wood. Inside, he found a folded paper and a small object. The object was a silver pendant shaped like a tree. It looked handmade, with fine details carved into the branches and leaves. The folded paper inside was another note. The note was short. It said, "This tree is a symbol of life and roots. It reminds us that even when we move away, our roots remain in the place we love. Whoever finds this, let it remind you of the power of home." Arun stared at the pendant for a long time. It was beautiful and meaningful. He held it gently in his hand, feeling a deep connection with the family who had once lived there. He hung it on a nail near the door so that it could catch the morning light every day, just as the family must have wished. As the day passed, Arun sat quietly near the open door of the barn. He thought about his own life again. For years he had been busy chasing things that never made him happy. He had forgotten how to slow down and appreciate simple moments. But here, among old memories and silent walls, he had found something real: peace, purpose, and a sense of belonging. He opened his notebook and wrote down everything he had discovered so far. He wrote about the Harrisons, the barn, the letter, and the pendant. He wrote about how it made him feel, how it reminded him that home is not only a place but also a feeling we carry inside us. When the sun began to set, he stood up and stepped outside. The sky was glowing orange and the forest looked golden in the fading light. The pendant hanging near the door sparkled in the sunlight. The barn looked alive again, as if the family spirit was still there watching over it. As night came, he lit a small fire and sat beside it. He felt calm but thoughtful. Now he knew the name of the town, Pinewood Valley. It was only 2 days' walk from here. Maybe he could go there and see if any part of the Harrison family still existed. Maybe someone would remember the farm and the barn. He looked at the stars above and made a quiet decision. The next morning he would start walking toward Pinewood Valley. He would take the photos, the notebook, and the letter with him. If he could find even one person connected to this place, he would return their memories home. The forest around him was peaceful, and the barn glowed softly under the moonlight. The pendant moved gently in the breeze, catching bits of starlight. Arun smiled and whispered that he would keep his promise, to protect the barn and to share its story. He didn't know what he would find in Pinewood Valley, but deep in his heart, he felt that his life was already changing. The next morning was bright and clear. The forest around the barn shimmered with soft light, and the air smelled fresh after the cool night. Arun woke up early, feeling determined. He packed his bag carefully, placing the old notebook, photographs, and letters inside. Before leaving, he stood near the barn door for a long time. The sunlight was falling gently through the cracks, touching the silver pendant that hung near the door. It shone like a small star. Arun smiled and whispered that he would return soon. He stepped out onto the path with his heart full of hope. He followed the same trail he had walked before, but kept going farther this time. The letter had said that Pinewood Valley was about 2 days' walk from the farm. Arun hoped to find someone who knew about the Harrison family or their story. The path led him through open meadows and dense forests. Birds flew above him and small animals moved quickly through the grass. As he walked, he felt the peaceful rhythm of nature all around him. Every step reminded him how far he had come, not just in distance but in his understanding of life. By midday, he stopped beside a stream to rest. The water was clear and cool, and he filled his bottle. As he sat on a rock, he looked at the notebook again. He opened it to the last page and saw the final line written by the Harrison father. "I hope one day someone will remember us." Arun touched the words gently and said to himself that he would fulfill that hope. He walked for hours until the forest began to thin, and the land opened into wide fields. In the distance, he saw smoke rising from small chimneys and heard the faint sound of people. It was the first sign of life he had seen in weeks. He felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as he walked closer. Soon he reached a small wooden sign by the roadside. It said, "Welcome to Pinewood Valley." Arun smiled with relief. He had finally found it. The town was quiet and simple. There were small houses with gardens, a few shops, and a narrow road that ran through the center. People greeted each other kindly, and children played near the fences. The place had a warm and peaceful feeling. He walked to a small cafe near the main road and ordered a cup of tea. The owner, an older woman with kind eyes, smiled and asked where he was from. Arun told her that he was a traveler who had been hiking through the mountains. Then he mentioned that he had found an old barn deep in the forest, one that once belonged to the Harrison family. The woman's expression changed. She looked thoughtful and said softly that she remembered hearing about the Harrison family when she was a child. Her grandfather used to tell stories about them. They had lived on a farm outside the town many years ago, but had to leave after heavy storms destroyed their land. Arun's heart beat faster. He asked if anyone from the family still lived nearby. The woman thought for a moment and said there was a man named Daniel Harrison who lived on the edge of town. He was an old farmer and might be related to the family Arun spoke of. She gave him directions to the man's house. Arun thanked her and quickly set off. He walked along a narrow road that led to a small hill. At the top stood a little white house surrounded by apple trees. The air smelled sweet and the sound of birds filled the space. He walked up to the gate and called out softly. After a moment, an elderly man came to the door. His hair was white and his face was gentle but strong. Aaron greeted him politely and explained why he had come. He told the man that he had been hiking through the forest and had found an old barn with the name Harrison Farm. He said he had found photographs, letters, and a pendant there. The old man looked at him in surprise. For a moment he said nothing. Then he invited Aaron inside. The house was simple and warm, with shelves filled with books and pictures. Aaron took out the photographs and placed them on the table. The old man picked one up, his hands trembling slightly. He looked at the smiling family in the picture and said quietly that those were his grandparents and his father when he was a boy. Tears filled his eyes as he looked at the photo. He said he had heard about the old barn but had never been able to find it. His father used to talk about it when he was young. They had left the place long ago, but the memories never left their hearts. Aaron listened with deep respect. He then showed the man the notebook and the letters. The old man opened them carefully and read the familiar handwriting. He smiled through his tears and said it felt like hearing his father's voice again. After a long silence, the man placed his hand on Arun's shoulder and thanked him. He said that finding those memories was like finding a lost part of his family. Then he asked if the barn was still standing. When Arun said yes, the man's eyes brightened. He said he would like to visit it one last time, to see the place where his family had once lived. The next morning, they both left together. The walk took many hours, but the old man moved steadily, supported by Aaron's care. When they finally reached the forest, the sight of the barn standing tall among the trees made the man stop, his eyes filled with emotion. He walked slowly toward it, touching the old wooden walls with his hands. "This is it," he said softly. "This is where my father worked and my mother sang while we played near the fields. It feels like time has been waiting for us." Inside the barn, sunlight poured through the cracks, lighting up the silver pendant hanging by the door. The old man saw it and smiled. He said his father had made that pendant long ago, carving it by hand as a symbol of their family. He touched it gently and whispered a quiet thank you. Aaron watched silently, his heart full. He felt that his journey had come to its true purpose. The barn had not just been a shelter for him. It had been a bridge between the past and the present, connecting lives that were once lost. They spent the day cleaning the barn together. The old man told stories about his childhood, how his mother used to bake bread near the window, and how his father worked with great care. The barn filled with laughter again, the same way it once had long ago. Before leaving, the old man took a small wooden sign from his bag. It said Harrison Farm. He asked Aaron to help him hang it back above the door. Together they fixed it in place. It looked just as it must have many years before. As the sun began to set, the old man turned to Aaron and said, "You have given me back a piece of my heart. Thank you for remembering us." Arun smiled and said softly, "Your family gave me peace when I needed it most. I only returned what was already here." They sat for a while, watching the golden light fade into the trees. The forest was calm and the air felt full of warmth and meaning. When it was time to leave, the old man took one last look at the barn and whispered that his family could finally rest in peace. Aaron walked him back to the road and watched as he disappeared into the distance. Then he returned to the barn one last time. The pendant glowed gently in the evening light, and the sign above the door stood proud once again. He sat down near the doorway, writing his final notes in the notebook. He wrote about how the journey had changed him, how he had learned that every place has a story, and how memories never truly fade when someone chooses to remember them. When night came, he looked up at the stars and felt a deep calm in his heart. The barn was no longer abandoned. It was alive again, filled with love, peace, and the echoes of laughter from long ago. Aaron knew his journey had found its true ending.